There's a point where words just lose their meaning, where no matter how many times you explain yourself, plead your case, or try to be understood, it all just falls flat. You get tired, not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from being emotionally worn down. So you stop, not because you've given up, but because you finally accepted the truth, that your presence was never truly valued, that your voice was never really heard. And in that moment, you go quiet. Not as a tactic, not as a game, but because silence becomes the only thing that feels honest. They didn't expect that. They were waiting for a scene, for an outburst, for a breakdown. But it never came. You just disappeared into your own peace. No grand goodbye, no emotional closure, no final text, just stillness. And that stillness, it hit them harder than any argument ever could. Because silence doesn't give them anything to argue against. There's no message to twist, no tone to critique, no words to manipulate, just emptiness, and in that emptiness, they're left alone with their own thoughts, and that's where the real damage begins. See, people expect noise. They expect emotion, they expect you to fight for them, even when they've already let go of the rope. But when you don't, when you walk away without a sound, it forces them to face something far more uncomfortable than your anger, your absence. And absence is a void that echoes. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It just quietly reminds them of what they lost in, how easily you let it go once you realized your worth. They'll never say it out loud, but your silence makes them uneasy, because it says something they don't want to hear. You're done. You're not playing the game anymore. You're not available for their cycles. You're not seeking validation, approval, or understanding. You've detached, fully, quietly, completely, and there's nothing more powerful than a person who no longer needs to be heard to know they're right. Silence makes them question themselves in ways your words never could. Because when you were speaking, they could deny. When you were fighting, they could deflect. But now, with nothing to grab onto, they're left spinning. They start wondering what changed, what they missed, why you stopped caring. But the truth is, you didn't stop caring, you just stopped trying to be cared for. And that shift, that's when everything begins to crumble. Because it's not about revenge. It's not about punishing them. It's about finally choosing yourself without needing anyone's permission to do it. It's about valuing your peace over the chaos of constantly trying to be understood. Silence, in its purest form, is not emptiness. It's clarity. It's you saying, I've had enough, not with bitterness, but with certainty. And that certainty, it's louder than anything you could ever say. There's something deeply unsettling about the moment you stop explaining yourself, especially for the person who took your words for granted. They don't realize it right away. At first, they just think you're being quiet, giving space, maybe even sulking. But then, it stretches. A day, a week, still nothing. And that's when it hits them. This silence isn't temporary. It's not hesitation. It's not passive aggression. It's detachment. It's final. You used to try so hard to be understood. You'd pour your heart into messages, try to unpack your feelings, clarify your intentions. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal, because you genuinely wanted to build something real, and real things require understanding. You gave them your truth on a silver platter, over and over, thinking that eventually they'd get it, but they didn't. Or worse, they did, and they still acted like it wasn't enough. So one day, you just stopped, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. You stop explaining your heart to someone who only ever saw it as an inconvenience. And that silence, it speaks louder than every word you ever said. Suddenly, they don't have anything to push against. No text to respond to. No paragraph to pick apart. No tone to argue with. Just silence. And in that space, the questions start flooding. And did I do too much? Did I push them away? Are they really done? You see, people aren't used to being left without answers. They're used to reactions. They're used to explanations they can twist into comfort. But when you go quiet, when you take your energy back and refuse to keep pleading your case, they're left with nothing but their own reflection. And the truth is, your silence holds a mirror they can't look away from. It forces them to confront the role they played, the words they ignored, the effort they dismissed. You weren't asking for much, just respect, clarity, effort, but they couldn't even meet you halfway. So now, your silence becomes their lesson. Not because you wanted it to hurt, but because it's the only thing left that actually gets through. When you stop explaining, they finally start listening to the things you're no longer saying. And the irony is, all those words you tried so hard to communicate before, they hit harder now that you're not saying them. The silence carries their weight more than your voice ever did. Because when you were talking, they thought they had time. But now that you've stopped, they feel the clock ticking. That urgency they never had before. Now, it's eating them alive. And they're starting to realize that your silence isn't empty. It's loaded with everything they ignored, everything they brushed off, everything they thought they'd never lose. By the time they understand what you were really saying all along, you won't need to explain it anymore. Your silence already said it better. It's strange how silence can feel louder than shouting, How not saying a word can echo in someone's head louder than anything you ever said to them. That's what gets to them, the quiet. You weren't trying to hurt them. You weren't trying to send a message. You were just done. But the ego doesn't see it that way. To the ego, silence is rejection. And rejection without explanation. That's unbearable. They could handle the anger, the frustration, even the sadness, because all of that still meant you cared, that you were still emotionally invested. But silence feels like indifference. It feels like you stopped caring completely, and the ego can't stand that. Because when someone who once gave you their attention suddenly withholds it, it hits deeper than any insult. It says, you're no longer relevant. I've moved on. They start overthinking everything, reading into the smallest things. Why haven't you texted? Why haven't you watched their story? Why haven't you said anything at all? And every unanswered question chips away at the confidence they once had in your affection. You see, silence doesn't just say, I'm gone. It says, I'm not coming back. It drives them mad, because they used to feed off your energy, your attention, your availability. And now, there's just a void, a quiet space where your validation used to live. And the longer it stays silent, the more that void grows. You weren't playing games. You were just choosing peace. But peace, to someone who took you for granted, feels like punishment. And that's what makes silence so powerful, not that it wounds with intent, but that it forces someone to feel exactly what you felt when they stopped showing up for you. They thought you'd break. That was the plan. Walk away, pull back, play it cool and wait for you to chase. Because that's who you were, right? The one who always reached out first. The one who forgave too quickly. The one who showed up even after being pushed away. They were counting on that, counting on your soft heart to betray your strong mind. But this time, it didn't. You didn't text, you didn't call. You didn't post anything to get their attention. You went quiet. And that silence, it's what's breaking them now. They're confused. They don't recognize this version of you. Where's the desperation? Where's the emotion? Where's the predictable need to fix things? They expected a meltdown, a paragraph, a late-night message. But instead, they got nothing. And nothing is louder than indifference. Nothing is more unsettling than a person who's found peace when they were supposed to fall apart. You didn't just walk away, you elevated. You showed them that your strength wasn't in how much you could endure, but in how easily you could choose yourself once you'd had enough. That silence, it's not a cry for attention. It's not manipulation. It's clarity. It's you saying, I no longer need you to understand me. I understand myself, ... And now they're the ones left staring at a door you didn't slam. You simply closed it and kept walking. No drama, no scene. Just a decision made in silence. And that decision is shaking them to their core. Because they finally realize you're not coming back, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself more than you ever loved chasing something that never loved you right. What's tearing them up now isn't just your side, how you're thriving inside it. You're not bitter. You're not broken. You're not throwing shots or seeking attention. You're just glowing, quietly, calmly, powerfully. You're doing the one thing they never expected, healing without them. And that's what's cutting deepest. Because they thought you'd be stuck, that without them, you'd crumble. But you didn't, you evolved. Maybe it's in the way your energy feels different now. Like peace has finally settled where chaos used to live. Maybe it's your smile, the real one, not the forced version they used to see when you were holding it all together. Maybe it's your distance, not cold, not angry, just indifferent, unreachable, and they notice. Even if they pretend not to, they're watching. Whether it's through quiet profile visits, mutual friends, or just replaying old memories, they feel your absence, not just the lack of communication,